one that has a soul and has a sense of humor and knows what's going on is Gad Saad. Welcome, Gad. How are you?
Hey, Glenn. So good to be with you. Thank you for the introduction. And let me just say that in the opening chapter of my book, I have a quote from you. So you are even more famous than you already are because you take a central role in the first chapter.
What really? What is the quote you used?
Well, it was basically when I think we spoke last when you kindly came on my show, and you said, I was walking into the studio today, and I don't know why I was happy, but I was just filled with happiness. And then I realized I was about to speak to Gad Saad, and that made me happy. I said, what a perfect quote for a happiness book.
Yeah. Well, it's true, Gad. I just love you because you are a happy warrior. And you are a warrior. I mean, you're fighting the good fight, and you know what is going on. Up in Canada, boy, you guys are in real trouble. But you are happy and whole. And when you look at this book, and I haven't read it yet, but you talk about several things that I want you just to highlight here.
Sure.
How to live the life you want, not necessarily the life expected of you. And my father said to me when I was young, there are two words that are so important, especially because the third word is the empowering word. I am blank. You better fill that in, or somebody else will fill that in for you, and that's who you'll become.
Perfectly said. So look, imagine your father is a pediatrician, and so he thinks that you should become a pediatrician because you come from a long lineup of pediatricians. But the reality is you were always interested in architecture and being an artist. Suddenly you wake up at 70 years old after a full successful career in medicine and realize you didn't live your authentic life. You lived the life that was expected of you from your parents, from your community. And that's a really terrible way to live life because these are the types of regrets that when you look back on your life are hard to change. So try as best as you can to know thyself so that hopefully you can make the right decisions.
I was talking to somebody a few months back, and he said, Glenn, you've got to learn something new. You got to spend an hour every day learning something new. And I took that to heart, and, I just started painting about 5 years ago, and I love it, and I've become a pretty decent painter. And as I was painting, I was thinking about, how great this is that I'm finally painting. I've wanted to paint my whole life. If I had nothing but time, that's probably what I would do. And I am living my authentic life. I know who I am. I love what I do, but I also have other things. And the other thing, as I was sitting there painting one day, was, I've always wanted to play the piano. So I bought a piano, and when I return home, I'm going to start taking lessons to learn the piano. It's not just not living the things that others tell you to do. It's also doing the thing. You might have a great job that you're pursuing, and it's great, but don't sell yourself short and just say, oh, I only do this. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you an amazing story. So this is in the chapter on regret, where I say that for many things, it's never too late to change course. So there was a gentleman who escaped around the start of when the Nazis were coming in, moved to Montreal, became a businessman, but had decided that, he just couldn't go to school, to university, because, life circumstances would not allow him to do that. In his 60s, when he retired, he said, you know what, I'm healthy. I have time on my hands. Let me enroll in an undergraduate degree. Now he's in his 70s. He says, hey, I'm healthy. Let me enroll and finish my master's. And then at the age of, I think, 91 or 92,
Love it.
He finally finished his PhD. So when students come into my office, Glenn, telling me, well, I feel too old. I'm 28 years old, professor. I don't think I can go back and do my MBA. I tell them, sit down. Let me tell you a story.
I tell you, you once you stop learning, I think you begin to die. I've got two other things that I really want to talk to you about. And will you please come to town so we can sit down and do a 90-minute
I would love to.
Talk
Anytime.
on this. Okay.
Anytime.
So you write in the book that your career needs to have a higher purpose than a paycheck, which I absolutely believe. The thing that gets me through every day is I know my life and my job have a purpose that is much bigger than success or fame or money or anything else. And it's multiple levels of purpose. But I think we have a whole society that is looking for purpose. Their purpose has become, fame or fortune for so many people. How do you find your purpose?
So in the chapter where I talk about how to find your optimal profession, I say that all other things equal, if you can find a profession that allows you to instantiate your creative impulse, you're well on your way to having purpose and meaning. Now, I define creative impulse very broadly. You can be a podcaster, you could be a chef, you could be an architect, you could be a professor or author. In other words, there are many, many ways by which I can immerse myself in the creative process. And that, by definition, is more likely to, grant you purpose and meaning. So, we need insurance adjusters. And I respect all honest jobs, but I'm willing to bet that the insurance adjuster doesn't wake up in the morning and say, thank God I'm an insurance adjuster. He has to find his purpose and meaning elsewhere. If you can find it in your job by being creative, boy, you won the lottery.
Yeah, I will tell you, though, that all thought is creative. It's just whether you recognize it or not. And I was just talking to somebody who was telling me a story, I'm trying to remember, of a friend of his who he went over to his house, and he was sitting there at the kitchen table, and he was reading algebra books. And he's an accountant or a CPA. And he was like, huh? Digging the algebra book, huh? And he's like, oh, yeah, no, numbers are so fascinating to me. I just like to read and reread this stuff. I mean, I don't get it, but some people do have that passion for things.
Yeah, indeed. Look, when I was speaking of algebra, so my undergraduate degree is in mathematics and computer science. And so, I had a very technical quantitative training. And because I'm sort of a broad-minded person, I like to pursue many interests. I tried to take all of my electives in fields that were as different as possible from mathematics. So to your point about, starting to paint recently, I took a ceramics course. Right? So imagine someone who is in mathematics, the most technical, theoretical field, sitting with a bunch of, fine art students. But that's what's beautiful about life. You need to sample from the full buffet of what life offers you.
The other thing that you talk about in the book that is so important is choosing the right spouse. And, you have to look for certain traits. And, for me, the second time around, I got it. I was old enough to understand. I found a woman who saw me for the man I had hoped to be, which made me a better man and made me want to be a better man, and a woman who loved the eternal truths of God. And she was hot. So I finally got it. But I don't know if people understand what the important traits are in the right person.
So as a general maxim, I would say, look, in evolutionary psychology, there are two opposing maxims. There's the opposites attract adage, and then there's the birds of a feather flock together adage. And it turns out, Glenn, for long-term success of a marriage or relationship, it's overwhelmingly the case that birds of a feather flock together, meaning you have to choose a partner with whom you share, life goals, values, belief systems. So, for example, if you, Glenn, you're a religious person and, you center God at the center of your life, then probably marrying someone who's a non-believer is going to put a lot of fissures in your marriage. So look for someone with whom you share these fundamental beliefs, and that increases your chances of being successful in your marriage greatly.
What is really interesting to me is I married a woman and she intentionally married me for, there was a gun involved, but she married me for the same reasons. We had, and this was her insistence, and I understood it, after she explained it to me, that if we don't have the basic fundamentals in lockstep, we'll never make it. But we are both birds of a feather in the basic core. We never have arguments on any of the core values. Unless, I come home and I'm like, what? What? No, I'm telling, that fits. Then she's like, no, it does. Anyway, we don't have real wrestles on that. And we are also opposites attract. And I think it would have been the death of us if she would have been, like, I'm very creative and vision driven and visionary. She doesn't have the vision. When I explain something, she'll go, I can't see it until I draw it out for her. She is very pragmatic. She is the opposite of me on those things. And I think that both of those things can be true at the same time.
You're absolutely right that there are some contexts where the complementarity of the two people makes a better union. But as you said at the start of your response, when I'm talking about birds of a feather, I'm specifically talking about those fundamental non-negotiables. If you have differences of opinion on those, then it just increases the likelihood of you failing in your marriage, because those are the fundamental mindsets that shape your life. So I agree with you. Opposites attract can apply, but not for sort of the deontological, non-negotiable elements.
Yes. Dr. Gad Saad, the name of the book is The Sad Truth About Happiness. Gad, I want to talk to you a little bit about Canada, because it is changing so rapidly. And I fear for Canada as much as I do for the United States. I've always found Canadians to be just much more less flighty. We're much more like, let's get it. And Canada is like, okay, all right, slow down a bit. But what's happening now, especially in the field of death, is terrifying, because I think people are being trained now to look at suicide as a reasonable option for anything, any kind of discomfort. And that never leads to a good place. Are you there on that or not?
I don't know. I'm not too familiar with some of the latest laws that have been passed, but I agree with you that we might have a slightly more tolerant view of euthanasia than I would like it to be. But I can tell you that Canada in general and Quebec in particular are just off the charts when it comes to the woke meter. I recently, it causes me great pain to talk about this, but I recently got into huge trouble in Quebec because I made a innocent, fun-loving joke about the Quebec accent on the Joe Rogan show, and that ended up being covered, for probably a week by every single media outlet in Quebec. I mean, I could criticize Islam and receive less hate than having criticized the Quebec accent in a fun way. So we've got a lot of work to do up there to try to preserve some of these foundational values that we hold so dearly.
What is happening with Jordan Peterson?
In terms of the Ontario psychology,
where he has to go to a re-education camp or lose his license.
That's right. It's absolutely unbelievable. I mean, what protects Jordan, of course, is that he is in a sense too big to be intimidated, and so I don't know what the final result is of that thing, but it speaks to such a dreadful reality where, as you said, you need to be sent to Gulag 13 for re-education for the criminally insane. It's unbelievable.
Can we were just talking about this in the Matrix, the first Matrix, was, they said in the first movie, was to make everybody happy, and everybody had a perfect life, and humans rejected it. Are we capable of truly being happy in a good state? I mean, America has had some really bad things, but the West, generally speaking, has been good for mankind. And we have a lifestyle bigger and better and easier than anyone's ever had it. But with the removal of some of that conflict, it seems like we just go to hell in the handbasket and start finding things to bitch and whine about.
Right. Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons why the difficulties that I went through in the Lebanese Civil War, paradoxically, actually make me a happier person, because having experienced the horrors of what societies can typically dish out, then I can always contextualize whatever is causing me to whine about some issue in the day. I can sort of stop myself and say, wait a minute, stop whining. You escaped miraculously the Lebanese Civil War. And that quickly kind of jolts me back into reality, whereas I think the West takes for granted all of these foundational values, and therefore they go into hysteria because you make fun of someone's accent or you misgender someone at Wellesley. Put it in context, man. There are a lot more things to be worried about.
Well, I don't agree with what you just said about people from Quebec, but I mean, if that's what you want to say, Gad. Gad, thank you so much.